Okay. So welcome, everybody. I'm George Sparks, President and CEO of the museum. It's so nice to have a real event with real people here, at least for a day until the snow hits. So, but we're all in training for how to stay at home now, so don't worry about that. It'll just be a natural thing. Thanks for joining us this morning to celebrate the opening of Stonehenge. We're excited to share the wonder and intrigue of Stonehenge with our Colorado community. Our talented team always goes above and beyond to ensure that guests who experience traveling exhibitions at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science get a little something extra. And they figured out that several only in Colorado connections to Stonehenge. So for example, can you imagine transporting big hunks of sandstone that weigh 20 tons, that's like 10 cars, from here to the foothills, either manually or just with animals, you know? I can't imagine transporting 10 cars with using today's transportation system and my pickup and all that stuff. I can't imagine doing it, manually. And Colorado's North Table Mountain is made of the same material as the 2 to 4 ton bluestones that the builders transported 150 miles. Finally, think about the splash pad that's over on the west side of the museum here in City Park. It's 84 feet across, and that's the same size as Stonehenge's inner circle of stones. So those creative local connections give me a new way to appreciate this. I'm really looking forward to this exhibit in particular. Whether through shared similarities or surprising revelations, we love seeing these aha moments for guests as they find inspiration through exhibitions like Stonehenge. What is truly remarkable about this exhibition is the depth of knowledge we now have about this silent, massive stones that we've gained through cutting-edge science. I think for eons, people have just marveled at these and really didn't understand what they were. When I was a kid, it was kind of like a fairy tale. We had no idea how those things got there or what they meant. For more on the remaining mysteries surrounding these iconic monument and the World Heritage Site, Museum Curator of Anthropology, Dr. Erin Baxter, will explain more in just a moment. Erin recently joined the museum to work on the Stonehenge exhibition, the cultural anthropology collections, and to conduct field work at sites in Colorado and New Mexico. I've been on the site with her in New Mexico. She specializes in U.S. Southwestern archaeology with particular interest in architecture and historic archives. So help me welcome Dr. Erin Baxter.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Sparks. I think you covered it beautifully, but I'm just going to call out a few points. And that is that where do we get this idea of Stonehenge? And the first person to put pen to paper about Stonehenge wrote about it 900 years ago. And what he said, Henry of Huntington, said, "Stonehenge, where stones of wonderful size have been erected after the manner of great doorways, and no one can conceive of why they were built there." By his time, the stories of Stonehenge had been lost, but that hasn't stopped successive generations from reinterpreting and retelling the story of Stonehenge, each through their own eyes. For instance, Geoffrey of Monmouth, who was a contemporary and also in the 12th century, he said it was a place where kings, both righteous and unrighteous, battled. And the winner of that battle ordered 15,000 men off to Wales or Ireland to go and bring back something novel that could be a monument to those dead men. So those 15,000 men marched off into the distance to bring this back, led by a guy named Uther Pendragon. I don't know if you ever heard of him. And they went to the Corea Gigantum in Ireland, which is the round of the giants, which had been brought, apparently, by giants from Africa. But the men were unable to lift the stones or move them. Merlin laughed at them and through magic brought the stones back and put them where Stonehenge is. So it was quite an age. The history might be a little dubious, but it was, by and large, rattling good history, as the Brits like to say. Later, in the successive generations, there were new interpretations. By the 1500s, it was attributed again to giants, to the devil, as sort of religions came into it. Phoenicians, Romans, Danes. By 1600, I think the flavor had gone out of it. Samuel Daniel said it's that huge dump heap, and which is not unlike a number of modern Yelp reviews, I might say. By the 1700s, it was all Druids all the time. By the 1800s, it was the literati of England who described it as a place of the Temple of the Winds and other lyrical things by Thomas Hardy. It wasn't until about the 1900s that antiquarians and scientists got after Stonehenge, and this is when the stories began to change again. By the early 20th century, they thought it had been built by kings. By the 1960s, it was all solstitial and astronomical, and maybe even a computer. By the 1970s, there was a dip as it became Stonehenge, and New Agers sort of took over, and aliens and the like. Science languished a bit, and so did the story. But really, in the 21st century is where this exhibit picks up, with new sciences and new technologies, when archaeologists basically threw the kitchen sink at Stonehenge to ask and answer that original question posed by Henry 900 years ago. What is this place? So they did basically three things that were sort of relatively unprepossessing. They re-excavated, for instance, one tiny little hole in the monument to find out what was found in that hole. These little things that had been put back, they're dug up, deemed irrelevant, and put back in the 1930s. They dug a trench over at Durrington Walls, the houses next door, and they found some pots and some pig bones. And they did aerial surveys over this drought-ridden landscape and found and saw things that hadn't been seen before. You add this to advances in the lab, chemical analyses, GIS, this idea of big data. Archaeologists collaborated with one another. It was shocking. And then you add in this X factor of creativity, and you get an extraordinary new and interesting and different scope of interpretation. And this is when I think Stonehenge studies really took off. And there are three in the exhibit that I would love for you to look at. And these are people, animals, and stones. Really simple concepts, but we have new information about each of them that tells this story. As far as people, we know about their demography, their age, their sex, their arthritis, their pathology, what they were eating. The fact that most of them there were women, and about 50% of them were from Wales. That's all new in the last few years, and that's demonstrated in this exhibit. Animals, the timing of their death, how their teeth erupted, and where they're from. We know that they were killed midwinter and midsummer. That lines up nicely with other sorts of events that probably happened at Stonehenge. And the stones themselves, the stars of this show, their transport, their origins, how they represented the identity of the people who quarried them, moved them, and erected them, and cared for them for generation and millennia. So these little pieces of stone and big pieces of stone that are unprepossessing, when you add it together, this is our age of Stonehenge, and this is our interpretation. And it's guided by history, but I still think the science tells the rattling good history now. And if I could pick an age, I think I would pick this one to know it. The surprising origins in Wales, not unlike Merlin, the tantalizing theory of change and development, the representation of duality and death of life. It's more and more complex and interesting every day. And new discoveries were just released a couple weeks ago. So it's grounded in science, and that is where this exhibit picks up and weaves it all together for you. So there are many ages of Stonehenge and many interpretations, but I think this is the best one. These silent stones are speaking, and they've come to Denver, and you should come hear what they have to say. Thanks.